Welcome all to another episode of Days of Our Cyber Lives, a cybersecurity podcast series presented to you by the Indiana Bond Bank and our Indiana Bond Bank Bondcast podcast. And we are so excited to bring you this breaking news episode of the Days of Our Cyber Lives series, where we're going to be talking about what I think many of you have seen in the news over the last couple of weeks, which is that Colonial Pipeline situation and the implications for Indiana, maybe not directly with Colonial, but just those risks that we all need to think about. And thankfully, the Bond Bank has a tool to help protect your fuel risks and the variability that may come with fuel for all you local governments who are users of fuel, whether that's fleets, school buses, and the like. And so we'll start today talking about kind of broad overview, what happened with the Colonial Pipeline, and then we want to spend some time with our team and our experts talking about the Bond Bank program that can help, again, mitigate those risks. So to do that today, we've got another fantastic group of experts. I want to welcome first our recurring panelists, guest hosts. Chetrice, I don't know what we're calling you these days, but just Cybersecurity Program Director for the Indiana Office of Technology and the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, Chetrice Mosley-Romero. Welcome.
Yeah, or Cyber Goddess, or Cyber Warrior of Indiana. I don't know. I have to really consider that as I have to reprint business cards for now that I'm seeing people and actually have to give things to people.
Wow. I think Cyber Warrior is fantastic. We also have two first-time guests. Russ Paluch is a principal at Maverick Energy Consulting, and Maverick is one of the professionals on our program, really help structure our fuel budgeting program, which you'll hear more about later. So Russ, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And a familiar voice if you are listening to the audio, and a familiar face if you're watching this podcast, Brian Carman, our Director of Marketing and Business Development for the Indiana Bond Bank.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's certainly interesting to be on the other side of the screen this time. I'm used to just doing the editing, adding the music, and then sending it off. So, but no, I'm happy to join you all today.
No, I did a poor job of teeing you up there. So this is not an auspicious start on my end. So welcome to the show, Brian. It's good to have you on this side. And I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are on the fuel budgeting program as well.
We'll definitely know that the edit is really good.
Yeah.
It's going to be the best edit ever.
This one will get a little more attention.
Yeah.
Well, Chetrice, maybe we'll start with you. And just for our listeners, maybe folks who've been off the news for a while, just give us a sense of what happened with the Colonial Pipeline, which is a fuel pipeline, right? Or it's a gas supply pipeline out on the East Coast.
Yep, it's 550 miles from Texas all the way up. So it's a big one. We most certainly have one pretty large one here, but this one was an interesting one. I think it's even more interesting because I think if you've been busy the last couple of weeks, just busy, because of our fuel supply here, we weren't as directly affected. Whereas if you were paying attention to the news and you weren't on vacation, or you weren't like me handling 4 kids, and it's my job, so I found out pretty fast. But other than that, it was the classic ransomware, but this was a hefty ransomware. It not only took over the systems May 6th, and they realized, and they did some precautions, and they did what they were supposed to do. This pipeline, they don't not have cybersecurity. They have lots of cybersecurity. They probably have a whole team on it, and the best type of technology infrastructure to take care of their systems, since it's such a critical infrastructure. But again, they unfortunately seems to have fallen prey to that human error. So somebody somewhere clicked or got into something they weren't supposed to, and malware got into the system and locked in the system. And the group called DarkSide, out of Russia, although not Russian government owned. So take that as you will, but still a very bad group. Absolutely. A business entrepreneur group, which we can talk about the craziness of that. They took on a whole bunch of information, so much information, and overlocked their systems up, and they straight up shut the whole pipeline down, all 550 miles. So May 7th, as it kept on, continuing, and it clearly was a big issue for the operations of the pipeline. As they were shutting things down, they obviously called law enforcement, FBI, federal government, and it was just a really kind of tough call. And they at the end of the day paid the ransom. So, a couple weeks later, they're all back to normal. Took them a bit to do that, but and as you may have seen, the president has issued a cybersecurity executive order in light of this, as well as the SolarWinds hack that many of us have heard about, because that is much more in our faces with a lot of the programs and companies and organizations we work with. So it's it's definitely a scary topic, but I think I love the fact that we're doing this for Cyber Days of Our Lives, because this is a great example of something operationally that caused a gasoline shortage. People ran, lots of gas stations on the East Coast just straight up ran out of gas, and that causes a lot of other safety and health concerns and infrastructure concerns. And probably anybody in Indiana noticed that the gas, we're paying a little bit more out of our pocket right now. So this cyber hack has absolutely affected everybody, including everyone in Indiana. So I think it just shows those cascading effects of how prevalent, but how much this can affect our everyday life. So so now that we're kind of finally getting over the COVID stuff, moving forward to normal things, this is another unfortunate ones and zeros virus that malware that is continually taking our systems down. So so now we have to figure out how to best protect ourselves in that area. So.
Wow, thank you, Chetrice. And Russ, Chetrice mentioned some of the impact, like to the markets, even like just you're driving down the gas station on the street if you're on the East Coast and you see these lines. Can you give us a sense like how the fuel markets reacted in the aftermath of Colonial and what that did to prices?
Sure. So I guess the first and foremost is like life wasn't already complicated enough, right?
Right.
We got to layer this one on. So, it's markets always have a tendency to overreact, but typically not necessarily in this instance, because you actually did run out of fuel. So we saw prices, there was hoarding that was going on. There was price gouging that was going on in these markets where there were shortages. So was there a panic? Probably a little bit. People start, loading up as much reserve tanks as they can find, and ultimately causing more and more shortages. So pricing was all over the place up and down the East Coast, but even in the Midwest, for the most part, we saw prices go up 5 to 7% within just a few days worth of, within a few days. So there's always a contingency impact to these things. It's fear, it's emotion. Like I said, we were fortunate that we didn't have the disruption here in the Midwest, but it certainly does, provide evidence that, it's just one more risk factor that we all have to deal with if and when something like this does happen to ourselves.
You talk about one more risk factor, and you use the word emotion, which is interesting because we're all, right, public policy, public sector, logical decisions, but ultimately, there's things out of our control, right? And emotion can sometimes take root and cause decisions that maybe aren't logical. So,
right.
Maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, price movement in itself. That when we see trends start to take over, right, becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You see it in the stock market, you see it in commodities, you see it wherever. Where just follow Bitcoin, on any given day, right? You see when the prices just surge up because people are getting leverage, and they're getting leverage for different reasons. As it relates to the fuel markets, I think you see people react just because of they want their lives to continue, right? It's just like during COVID when everyone was hoarding toilet paper and, whatever those typical, daily needs items. So people just, I think, human condition is just to gather, right? So they do that, and we see prices we see prices move significantly in very short periods of time because of it. Whether or not there's actually been a fundamental reason to shift that price, but you layer in, that that speed at which people start reacting to things, and it just escalates the price movements.
And it's scary,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I think you're so right. I think the emotion factor of these types of situations that we find ourselves in, it is not only a human that causes a lot of these cyber attacks. It's about, it's 5 years ago when I started down this path, that people were kind of thinking, yeah, about 75%, and it's up to like 90% is the reason of these cyber attacks. Why they're happening is because of human error. Whether it's somebody clicking something, putting something in a computer they shouldn't, providing access, being socially engineered for credentials, usernames and passwords, or just falling for that really good phishing email that seems very believable. It really is a scary thing, and I think people underestimate how we all kind of, I always kind of tell people, the problem with the cyber attack on any infrastructure is after so many days, I mean, even the sweetest kindergarten teacher will be really mean if that means to protect her own kids. Because that's what we fall to, right? It's kind of the caveman mentality, and that's not anybody's fault. That is our Maslow hierarchy of needs. Safety, our needs, our supplies, those are always going to be met first. Not, well, I'm going to be considerate of my neighbor, but and not take those extra things or get 20 more gallons of gas than I need, right? Even though I'm going to be staying home the next, 2 weeks, right?
The word that keeps coming to my mind is fragile. How fragile everything is, and if it does crack, and how fast does that crack spread? And, it's interesting just to see, the fragility and supply and demand curves, right? If that supply piece gets disrupted, well, the demand curve doesn't necessarily go away. So that just makes the crack faster, wider. There's a million different analogies that we can come up with, but that fragile side of our world, whether it's like you said, cybersecurity fragility, right, or it's infrastructure like roads and bridges. I mean, it's interesting to think about how when these things happen, the magnifying glass that goes on it, once it's broken, then the magnifying glass goes on versus ahead of time, right? So again, teaching people and preparing people, not to click on that particular email, or preparing, CFOs or controllers to, understand, if something does happen, what happens to the price risk in your budgets accordingly. Yeah. So that kind of, segues into what I think, about the Indiana Bond Bank's fuel hedging program that we have, that we've been working on since 2008. It's, to me, it's just, it's tools, right? Having enough tools, to do your best to avoid pitfalls. So,
yeah.
And so I think I love the image of like that crack, that fragile thing, like this is the cyber hacks, almost another crack in the egg. And, I'm in that space. I'm in the fuel space a little bit with this program. Russ, you're in it a ton more, but I can just think, uncertainty in fuel producing countries in the Middle East, OPEC, right. Cyber, like there's all these different cracks in the egg that are out of, if I'm a school and I have a fleet of buses that I need to fuel, I know how much I need quantity wise. At the beginning of a budget cycle, I probably don't have a real good sense of how much that's going to cost me over the years. And I don't know where you or Brian may want to jump in on that from, whether it's what all those risks are, or how might you achieve some budget certainty. Just throw that out there and let you guys run with it.
I'll turn it over to Brian for that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think, especially for the purpose of this podcast, because we talked about the toilet paper shortage, and then what you're looking at on the news, you're seeing these things, and you're seeing people fighting over gas, filling up with plastic bags. And there's that emotional component to it. But what is not always talked about is how it affects not just the consumers, the individual consumers, but also units of government, and then that kind of relaying effect as to how they manage their finances and make sure that kids are picked up and go to school. And the bond bank does offer the fuel budgeting program, which is by far the most unique financial service that we offer to local government, which, Mark, as you mentioned, could be a city, town, county, school, fire district, really any unit of government that needs to budget and project out what their fuel consumption is going to look like for a year. And the way I think of the program is really as an insurance policy. not dissimilar to an auto or homeowners insurance policy where, in the case of auto insurance, if you get into a car wreck without an auto insurance policy, you're going to be left with these large expenses for repairs or injuries, anything related to the crash. And we don't really budget for these things to expect them to come about at any point. And so you're kind of left either having to figure out, okay, do I dive into my savings? Do I get a personal loan out? Do I take what I would have spent money on something else and then use it for these repairs? But if you have the insurance policy, then obviously the car insurance company will reimburse you for those expenses. And the fuel budget program works the same way, just on your projected fuel costs. And so the Indiana Bond Bank sets a cap number really based on projections and the current market value of fuel at the time. And whenever the average daily price of fuel in a given month exceeds that cap number, we will reimburse units of government who participate in the program for whatever gallons amount that they hedged, times whatever the price difference is between the cap we sent and the actual cost of fuel for that month. And we've certainly seen, there's a lot of things that affect this, as we have mentioned. As it was mentioned, we were not as affected by the Colonial situation as we were very fortunate to not have been. But obviously, even with the pandemic over the last year, we've seen fuel prices rise up after being historic lows. And it was very difficult for units of government to project what these costs were going to be. But knowing that they had a cap price where anything above that, and what we've seen really since January, that they would be protected by. And when we did see, since January, when we really saw those fuel prices start to go up, the bond bank has already distributed, just since our last April settlement, over $188,000 in reimbursements in these fuel cost protection. So it's a great program for any situations like this, because it's largely unpredictable. It's global economic factors that we just can't predict. And then sometimes it's local, like here with the Colonial Pipeline. So it could be cyber breaches, but it's just another way, especially if you're a town manager or something, where you can feel very good about setting your budget and kind of that set it and forget it mentality, because you know that you're going to be protected over that cap price. So that's really the essence of the program. And obviously we've seen a lot of benefit to it over the last few months.
Well said.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So Russ, maybe, or Brian, just round numbers. So I think I heard you say, Brian, right, the price of gas is doing this. If you're listening, you can't see my hand, but it's going up and down, right? So the bond bank, or if you're participating, bond bank is doing what? You said like a cap. So yeah, throw out like a number, and then what does that look like?
So like right now, the participating members have a cap around $1, around $1.45. Okay. And current market is trading around, this is a wholesale type number. It doesn't have delivery or taxes in it, but basically it's not gonna be your local pump price. But comparatively speaking, it's right now it's trading around 205. So you've got about a 60-cent differential between the cap price that a member of the program is locked into. When the market's at 205, they're receiving a check for 60 cents every month for the number of gallons that they're pledging to the program. So in essence, even though they have to go back out into the physical market and take local delivery from somebody, or they buy it at a pump or whatever in over $2, they're going to get a reimbursement of right now 60 cents a gallon for that.
Yeah, in April, and just we can see the trajectory. It's been going up and up, and even in April, we had a 40-cent difference between the cap and what the average daily cost was for the month of April. And we do allow units of government to protect up to 80% of their total projected fuel consumption. So let's just say in the month of April, a unit of government projected to use 100,000 gallons of either gasoline or diesel. Let's just say gasoline for this sake. And they protected that full 80%. They then have 80,000 gallons, which will multiply by that 39-cent difference between the cap and the average daily cost. And that would result in a reimbursement check of roughly, I think, $31,000 But so that, yeah, that's how we do it. We do cap that limit at 80%. But yeah, just as Russ said, it's a pretty significant difference, and I hadn't heard those numbers. So even here, it's up to 60 cents. I mean, that's a huge margin right there.
Yeah, and also just I mean, to try to, what moves markets, right? I mean, we know, a ransomware attack will move markets, right? We know OPEC cutting output will move a market. You've got a Russian pipeline that's been in the news lately as well, which I wonder how much of that is correlated to the Colonial Pipeline issue as well. So politics becomes geopolitical events become a part of this discussion as well. I'll throw in inflation as a big risk to what's happening with fuel prices, and both near term and long term. Cryptocurrencies are playing with the values of the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar and crude oil has an inverse relationship. So if the dollar goes down, typically crude oil goes up. So, and that ultimately means heating oil and gasoline goes up. So there's a million different things in addition to what I will view as probably the biggest risk to consumers in the Midwest these days is renewable energy initiatives. There's a lot of conversation about green energy, electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And you can almost say, the competing nature of fossil fuels, your typical carbon fuels, those prices have to go up over time in order to make renewable energy more attractive so that these initiatives can take a greater root. But even so, if everything goes right, the best projections that we see right now for electric vehicles is that by 2030, you're still only talking about 8% of all vehicles being electric vehicles in the United States. So you're still going to have a significant need for fossil fuels for as long as I can see. It's not going to be an overnight switch. So that volatility is really what is at risk here as policy changes, as investment strategy changes, because if investment starts moving away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy, it could leave that other 92% of the market somewhat exposed, increasing volatility, increasing costs. There's carbon taxes to be concerned about. There's a lot of things that are moving around within the energy infrastructure today that I think somebody sitting here trying to run a city, a town, a school district really shouldn't be taking on that risk. They should be offsetting that by participating in the bond bank fuel hedging program.
So that's a great point. Leads me to my next question. Let's say I'm managing a school district and those finances, which includes the fuel budget. So what am I doing now? I mean, perhaps there's some small subset who are just like running naked and just, right, I'm going to whistle by the graveyard and just, right, cross my fingers and hope nothing bad happens. What are some of the other strategies folks use if they're not in our program, and why, frankly, why is our program superior to some of those other strategies?
Yeah, well, like I said, some are just floating the market. They're buying at a rack from a local supplier, and that's fine. They're getting gas, but it comes with a different price every single day that you buy it. So if the market's going up, you're going up with it. There's also the ability for them to fix a price through a local supplier. But that's a very costly solution because that counterparty, that jobber has to go into the markets that the bond bank is typically entering with a much higher credit rating and a much greater volumetric presence to drive down costs. So from an efficiency standpoint, you could enter into a fixed price. If you do that, then you're set. You have to commit that number of volumes at that price. If something happens where you can't consume that, you still have to pay for it. Versus if you're a part of the bond bank program, you're committing to a price ceiling for a certain number of gallons. If you don't take those gallons, you don't have to take those gallons. You don't have to buy them no matter what. So it eliminates a tremendous amount of risk in your volumetric side. And I think that's important as as the program has evolved and as it sits today, it was designed with that in mind because of things like the pandemic. If a pandemic resurges and schools have to close and buses aren't running, well, then they don't need the school, right? Same thing with the city. If you're not running as much public transportation or transit, you don't need that fuel. So the program's set up now to really maximize the opportunity and protect against the upside, but also protect in case something happens to the point where prices go down, or you don't need the demand goes down and you don't need as much fuel. So you're protected on both sides. And that's really one of the biggest differentials with the bond bank program as well. So you're not, you have choices out there on your own, as an individual consumer, but there's strength in numbers within the bond bank program because we're collaborating, we're gathering up bulk buying, if you will, to draw in greater interest from higher rated financial counterparties that really drive down the cost in terms of the transactions and the insurance itself.
Yeah, and just to take it even more baseline than that, if you look at how someone's going to be setting their budget for fuel consumption, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be based on historical trends. So they might look at last year and the year before and say, okay, we used this much, this is how much it costs. But as we know, with the market, that's not going to be 100% accurate. And there's a good chance that it's going to have a huge swings. What cost of fuel was this summer is going to be different than what it was last summer, obviously. And so this is where that reassurance comes in. And as Russ mentioned, one of the benefits of us as a quasi-state entity is our ability to work statewide and pool together different entities together. Again, a district is put in the same pool as a school, a fire district is put in the same pool as a school. So they're able to achieve higher levels of efficiency going through us, cost efficiencies, than they would going out one-on-one trying to obtain this type of protection.
That's fantastic. And I think maybe this is just a bigger question or thought experiment for the group. I think about Whiting, right? Whiting as a production facility, is there a pipeline? I mean, just thinking about Chetrice, Russ, Brian, like if you're in the program or you're doing some sort of protection, we hope you are, whether you're in the bond bank program or not. We'd love you in the bond bank program. But if you're not protected and a colonial situation happens like that, that's a scary situation. I think there's much more to be said. But.
Well, I think when you're looking to, I mean, I love what you guys do for local governments because, my discussions, even at a cybersecurity perspective for cyber education, for cyber training, for updating technical systems and critical infrastructure systems so that they're best protected. So much of the best things that are out there are done through programs that are creating efficiencies by the numbers, and at least from my perspective and in my experience of the more than decade of being with the state, and working with Indiana Bond Bank on just seeing what they do for local governments, unlike maybe other people, I think there's something to be said about, states wanting to provide something that is truly helpful and creates those effectiveness and efficiency strategies for people who are already struggling to figure out, how do I work this on already limited funds, right? Because even like, Brian, you were saying like the 80%, well, that's still 80% more of a cap coverage, gap than somebody that didn't have it, or, with the fixed or the day-to-day purchasing that, I know a government, that, couldn't do a certain training for cybersecurity because it was $5,000 and they just didn't have the money. They were already at a shortfall. I imagine with fuel, while it may not be at the upfront all the time, when these types of things happen, because of the millions of factors, like you said, that goes all the way, can be something that doesn't even happen in our own country. It can be something that happens in the other side of the world, affects a little town in Indiana, and you may not even be aware of it. You just know the prices are going up and down and things are missing that. Now you're looking at a, like Brian, like I would say that, for any local government who's kind of struggling, and especially after the pandemic, $31,000 is a lot of money. That's a full-time position. That's putting that towards something that is going to truly, benefit the quality of life for their constituents. And I think, I like the fact that this is like, be prepared if these things happen. And then of course I would be remiss to not say, be prepared so that, the one thing you can control, you may not be able to control the cyber attacks, you may not be 100%, but anything you can do to train your employees about these type of incidents, should be as equivalent to saying that we live in Indiana and we should always be prepared for a tornado, right? I mean, it's as important and as prevalent, if not more so, because at least tornado, there's a season for it. You're not getting tornadoes in January, but you know, you are getting cyber attacked all 365 days of the year. And this is happening across the world. It's happening across the nation. So most certainly, I imagine with this kind of scary thing that happened, you know, with this fuel pipeline, you know, for something like that, having that ripple effect all the way down to a town manager of a small town in Indiana, that's some scary stuff. So I'm, at least as a consumer on the other side and person on the other side, it's good to see that you guys have these programs. You know, now if only I can get those type programs for cybersecurity things. So Mark, we need to talk. But I think, you know, every bit helps with when we're trying just to deliver good government services, you know, as that's one of the key pillars of the governor, just providing efficient, effective government services. That's the best we can do.
And I put it another way too, is like there's one of the members of the fuel hedging program. It's a municipality. They just view it as a discipline. You know, they do it no matter what. You know, it's who we are. We participate. We mitigate risk wherever we can. You know, it's their philosophy. You know, on how they run their business. It's not that they're trying to beat the market or, you know, hey, this is the good year. This is the right year to upgrade our software, right? You know, we'll get it next year, right? No, it's just, this is what we do, and we put it in there so that there's never any surprises, or at least we're limiting the surprises, you know? So it's just a disciplined approach that they take. And I always enjoy talking to that individual, because it's amazing how they view it, you know? It's not emotional. They try to take it out of it. It's just, this is how we run our business, period.
Yeah, that's, and that is that kind of culture mentality is super important, right? And I think in government even more so, because, you know, they're much like a parent, right? You can find a million other things to spend money on, but at the end of the day, you need to spend money on, you know, making sure things are safe, making sure you have the basic needs, making sure you have car insurance, right? I mean, so yeah, more likely I'm not going to get in a car accident, but if I do, I also, you know, don't want to lose my house because I got $100,000 medical bill, right? And now my kids don't have a place to stay. And I think as a government employee, you know, so much of our hearts to the service of our communities is, I don't ever want my community to lose its house or, you know, lose essential services because I didn't go through the extra step of applying for something and taking advantage of something just to have as, you know, as what it is. So I think it's one of those things I think is, you know, town managers, I'm sure you guys run into it all the time. They are super busy. They're super stretched. They're doing 5 jobs for one person who, let's be honest, government doesn't pay well. But the service of that and why so many people do this for so long is because they truly care about the community. So if this is an easy win, you know, low hanging fruit, then, you know, from my perspective, I wish there were a lot more low hanging fruits with cybersecurity attacks, and that people didn't have to throw out millions of dollars to ransomware. But at the end of the day, you know, when Colonial Pipeline paid, it was because they needed to outweigh how is this going to cascade to those little small towns in Indiana. And, you know, we can't have this take down our full economy, right? So it's a hard decision. It's controversial for sure in cyber, but I think it's all that's so much more complicated. So I like what you say, Russ, like, can't limit everything, you can't control everything, but what you can do is at the very least be prepared and know what you're going to do if these things happen, because they will.
What a fantastic conversation. And Brian, will you just take us home with, folks want to learn more about the fuel budgeting program, what should they do, who should they contact, what's that next step?
Yeah, it's timely in the sense that we will be opening applications for our next pooling round. So again, kind of on an annual basis is usually what we do. We set a hedge for a year out, just because that kind of seems to allow the market to be in some sort of direction, which we anticipate. And we are working now towards a fall hedge. Really the best thing to do, and because I'll be editing and pushing this out, I'll make sure that all the information on how to get more information is there. But really, we have a designated mailbox for the program. It's fuel@inbondsbank.com. So even if you just wanted to have some preliminary conversations, but we will have a packet ready by really middle of June at the latest, and start bringing people in. So yeah, it's a great time to have the conversation, and be happy to follow up with anyone who's interested.
I was really hoping you were going to do like,
Yeah, do you go like down,
Click
like
here. Yeah, swipe up. Yeah.
look around. I like that, Mark. We kind of are in sync.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, we should do like a wave in one of these things and just, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Chetrice, Russ, Brian. It's always a pleasure, and just really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for teeing up what happened with Colonial, and then everybody kind of bringing it back to Indiana, why that matters, and what we might do to protect ourselves as local government and local leaders.
Absolutely.
With that, I'll let everybody sign off.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Very
you all.
good.
All right, stay safe.
All right, and for the Indiana Bond Bank, this is Mark Wuellner saying thanks for listening to Days of Our Cyber Lives at the Indiana Bond Bank Bondcast. We'll talk to you later.